Yo de lejos como un ovni, le hice a toque suizo, homie. Pero en la cama nos comíamos y sabemos que eso era más que un hobby. Bebé sé que tiene la táctica, pero yo tenía la técnica. Él solamente te hace llorar, yo en la cama te ponía a gritar.
Back to Close to Broke. My name is Kieran, and today we find ourselves at the Bicycle Casino. Don't like coming here very much, and like I said, I don't want to beat a dead horse at this point. I have my reasons. The one thing I will say, the tournament staff and Aaron, who's a poker room manager, or in some capacity, he's one of the directors on the floor. He's the absolute nuts. He's amazing. He's also a watcher of this vlog. Maybe that's why he's so great. I'm gonna go ahead and hop into today's session. We're on the list for 5-5, 5-10, and 10-20, whatever we can get into. Let's see how it goes. Couple things. Obviously, you guys just saw the Hustler session. No spoilers. I will be putting that episode out next week, hopefully Monday. Yeah, besides that, if you guys are seeing this today, which is Friday, I want to let you guys know again, the meetup game for Baltimore is going to be Sunday, so we're a few days away. I'm actually in Baltimore by the time a lot of you folks are seeing this. Telegram link, if you guys want to join the Splash Squads, it's a really awesome time. I'm in there every single day of the week. I appreciate you guys more than you'll ever know. I hope you guys enjoyed today's session. It should be a good time, and let's hop in.
Before we get into today's session, there's a couple of things I wanted to let you guys know about this spot. It's no longer the bike. And as you guys can see from the chips a little bit, we're currently at the Park West Bicycle Casino. It was currently bought out by, I think, some other new ownership or whatever the heck. It's kind of interesting to see like money coming into what you would consider like the home casinos in your area. I'm sure you guys have seen it where somewhere that you like to go to or whatever gets bought out and it just becomes a different thing. Interesting to see that happening here in LA. Obviously, it's on bigger scale. The bike was already a massive casino, and it's kind of interesting to see all this unfold. Anyways, you guys aren't here to learn the history about poker rooms in California, so I'm here to give you guys the hand histories of my poker session. In the very first hand, I'm in the straddle. We're playing 5, 10, 20, and I'm in the game for $3,000. The small blind decides to limp. The big blind limps as well. And the action's on me. We look down at Queen Deuce of Diamonds here. I end up checking my option. It's nice to have a hand that's like reasonable like this in a check back. I feel like if I raise here, it'd be a bluff. And considering how unconnected this hand is, doesn't seem like to make too much sense to me. We're going off to a flop that comes 4-3 Deuce Rainbow. I didn't notice it at the time, but the big blind led for $40 and I didn't see him bet. So I ended up betting for $25. Anyways, the dealer corrects me, notifies me that the opposition had already bet, so I make the call for $40. The small blind gets out of the way. We're going to a turn card that comes the 5. This is now an interesting situation as there is a full rainbow out there, but also any ace and any 6 make a straight. If my opponent shows some sign of weakness or sign of aggression, that'll help me figure out a path throughout this hand. If he checks here, I actually don't mind checking back and playing rivers as some bluffs, or, you know, taking the bait and maybe bluffing now. He ends up deciding on a check. I think it's okay to just check it back and probably bluff the river if I have to. The river comes out of Queen of Hearts when my opponent checks to me yet again. I'm going to go ahead and take the bait. If he has an ace here, then he's probably going to call anyways. So if there's any small chance I could ever get him to fold a 2 pair, I think I've got to go a little bit on the larger sizing. So I make it $175. Again, going over the size of the pot here. My opponent, luckily, snap folds. So I don't know what he had to bet out pretty large on the flop there, going 2/3 on the flop. So whatever the case may be, happy to take it down, and let's get into the next hand. As for most sessions here that go on at the bike, the games are just tend to play a little nittier, although the stack sizes are much larger because the max buy-in is significantly more than any of the other casinos here in Los Angeles. It feels like the chips are never really in play. Feels like you have to run the nuts into the second nuts to get it all in, but alas, I'm still here and I'm looking to make as much money as I can. So I'm going to play as close to optimal as I can. I look down at Queen Jack offsuit. Again, the straddle is going to be mandatory for every single hand you see today. I make it $60 from under the gun. We're playing 7 or 6 handed at this point, I believe. The small blind makes the call. And we're going off to a flop heads up that comes Queen 6 8 with 2 spades and a club. The really interesting thing that occurs now is my opposition decides to donk lead. He bets $25. When somebody bets this small, out of position as a donk lead, I don't really give them much credit. And to be honest, if they're willing to donk lead in my head, I pretty much treat it as a check with the intention of c-betting what I would be usually doing, or the same percentage, I should say, and understanding that they're going to be calling, I think, fairly wide. So I end up raising it to $95. Again, I'm trying to bet somewhere in excess of 60% of the size of the pot. My goal is to get as much money as I can in the middle while I know I'm ahead. You can definitely be doing this with some random gut shots, some random flush draws, some random straight draws. There's a ton of equity out there, and there's even an opportunity for my opponent to have a weaker queen. After a little brief moment of thinking, he asked for the price, and eventually decides to make the fold. Yeah. Unfortunate. I guess we made it a little too large. I wonder what would have happened if I just made the call, but I just feel like if I just make the call, I leave myself a little vulnerable in later streets, and moreover, I can just lose a ton of value from a hand that's drawing. Some time passes until this next hand. When we look down at King 10 offsuit here from the under the gun position, or under the straddle, I should say, I make it $60 to go. There's a solid pro, or I guess somebody that, you know, has a job and says they're not a pro, but they're probably making some reasonable income as a side anyways. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but shout out to Jonah. He's a friend of the vlog, a longtime watcher, and a super, super solid pro, or whatever the hell he wants to call himself. Anyways, that's enough of me hyping him up. It's now time to take some of his money. Only he decides to make the call. We're going heads up to a flop that comes King 9-5 Rainbow. This is a really, really interesting spot here, not just because I flop top pair, but it's pretty important, I think, for us to have some checkbacks on this flop texture. I don't need to protect from a great deal. It's, you know, very common to say I'm most likely really, really ahead at this point. And sure, I can get called by a hand like 6-7 or 7-8 or 9-10. But more than likely, I'm just really far ahead, and I can set up for 2 streets of value with the hand with as weak a kicker as I have now. If I had ace king or king queen, I'd be more than likely to, you know, at least consider going 3 streets or, like I said, betting this flop. But it's really important to have a check back on this board texture with top pair. So when he checks over to me, I do just that. We're going off to a turn card that comes an 8 of clubs. There's now a full rainbow out there, and when the opponent checks over to me, it's now time to get money in the middle. I decide to c-bet here for somewhere around half the size of the pot, making it $80 to go. I'm targeting all of his draws, all of his middle pairs, all of his pair plus straight draws. He ends up making the call. We're going off to a river that comes the 9 of diamonds. At first sight, you know, this might seem like a little bit of a tricky river card because, sure, my opponent can have a ton of middling pairs here. But when he decides to check it, I feel like his range or his hand distribution consists of mostly showdown value. I think his random bluffs or his hands that can block some straight draws or like really, you know, bad pairs would most likely be bombing this river as a bluff, or obviously his trip 9s would be betting this river for value. So when he decides to check it over to me, like I said, at first sight, I was a little worried and I thought maybe I'd be going too thin if I go for value. But after a little bit of thinking, I realized that this is a spot I can't miss for going for what is thin value in reality. Again, I'm targeting some of his middling pair holdings and possibly even slightly weaker kings. I know there's not a lot that exists out there, but I'd be a fool, I feel like, to not go for some value here. I bet $150. My opponent ends up making the fold. Unfortunate there. Like I said, it's going to be hard to get money off this table, so hopefully things work out better for us as the session goes along.
Just wanted to do a quick mid-session update for you guys. The game is going okay. We're getting moved over to the main game. Things are going okay. The game is super slow, as we've talked about many a time in the past. Pretty much it's the game's slow, trying to make some money, and we're not gonna be here for too much longer as duty calls. We got to go to work in a little bit, so hopefully we can leave when there's still light out. I'll check in with you guys again in a little bit. Thank you guys so much for supporting. Let's get back in there.
As you folks can see here, the change of scenery has occurred. We've been moved into the main game, which looks a little better than the previous game we were in. The one thing that I will tell you is we're definitely in the worst seat of the house. The seat 1 and seat 9 are definitely the worst seats, not vlogger friendly. Can't see much of any of the action besides me betting, so bear with me. We're going to find a better seat in just a little bit. But for now, we look down at pocket 10s under the straddle. We just had to raise it up to $60. Both the big blind and the straddle make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes 3 deuce deuce with a spade and 2 diamonds. The action checks over to me, and I realize here that I need to be betting for some equity denial. Sure, I mean, people can make the argument for going a little smaller, but I end up making it $130. I'm targeting flush draws as well as some middling pairs, as well as some random wheel aces or some random straight draws. The interesting part happens, both players make the call. So we're looking to fade some diamonds on the turn, and the turn card comes the not that. It comes the 8 of diamonds. It's even more annoying when the action checks the straddle and he decides to bet out here for $320, going fairly big here, you know, reasonably massive on the turn. I don't even think about it for longer than what it seems like 5 seconds. I look down at my hand, I realize I'm not holding a diamond. This is a very easy hand for me to find the fold. Why do I bring this hand up? I can make a big fold sometimes. I mean, sure, it looks really easy in hindsight, but folding an overpair is never easy, or at least not for me. Anyways, this hand is not over yet. It's important that I let you guys know the conclusion. The big blind thinks about it for quite some time before eventually making the call. The river comes the 7 of hearts. Straddler checks once again. The big blind checks once again, and the straddle decides to bet $560. After quite a bit of pause, the big blind ends up making the call. The straddler shows 6-4 of diamonds there, so he flopped himself quite a lot of action, quite a lot of equity. But the opponent of the big blind shows King 9 of diamonds. Wow, absolute setup cooler of a flop for all of us. I'm happy I was able to get away relatively unscathed. A few hands have passed by and I find myself in the straddle here. The gentleman who scooped the last pot that we talked about decides to open the button for $75. He's an older gentleman and here to have some fun, it seems like. I'm in the straddle. We look down at King 3 of spades. Gonna go ahead and defend this $75 open here by making the call. We're going to a flop that comes Queen 6-3 rainbow. I decide to continue playing in float by making this a check. It's hard for myself to have really any leads on this board texture. The opponent ends up c-betting for $100, and considering there is a spade, I do have a pair, and I do have an over to the board, I end up making the call, which feels fairly standard, and the turn card comes the 7 of clubs, bringing a backdoor flush draw. I check it over to my opponent, he does the club check, and ends up checking it back. The river comes a deuce of spades. Seems like a pretty innocuous card, doesn't change a whole lot to the board texture. The action is now on me, and I'm in between going for thin value or betting as a bluff, and I think more than likely I can accomplish this was actually making a fairly small bet. I feel like if he has a hand like 5s or 4s, he's going to fold if I bet pretty much any amount, and I can definitely get a hand that's weaker than that, like maybe ace high to make a hero call. Again, it's all dependent on my sizing. I end up deciding to bet $100, going very small here. My opponent goes into the tank, he starts fumbling with his chips, fumbling with his cards, before eventually making the fold. So I feel like he possibly had like a king or ace high here, but whatever the case may be, whatever he had, I end up the winner. So happy to take this pot down and looking to chug along here. To be totally honest and transparent, most of the hands in this session up to this point have been kind of boring and a little bit of a lull, but thanks for hanging in there. The rest of the session is an absolute roller coaster of emotions, and you guys are going to really love it. In this following hand, as promised, Under the Gun decides to limp here for 20 bucks. We find ourselves in middle position, and with 8-5 of spades, I'm going to go ahead and use this as an isolation, considering I'm fairly late position. You know, there's not that many people that I have to worry about being in position behind me. So I decide to make it $110. Unfortunately, the cutoff and the button, the two people that are behind me, end up making the call, and so does the straddler. We're going out of position to a flop that comes 4 deuce deuce rainbow. There is a spade out there, which is nice. We're 3/4 of the way to a straight flush. When the action gets checked over to me, I actually decide to use this as a bet. It's good to know that my hand doesn't really correlate with a bunch of overcards, and I think a lot of people can be floating or at least considering that. So I end up deciding really early in the hand that I'm going to go three streets with this hand. Whether I make my hand or not, this is, in my opinion, a good hand to go 3 streets with. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, you know, that's up for debate for sure, but like I said, I'm never going to stray away from aggression. It's what's helped me out quite a bit in my game, and, you know, hopefully you guys like that. I end up c-betting for $125, not going too large, and my opponent from the cutoff decides to make the call. Everyone else folds, and we're going off to a turn card that comes a queen of clubs. Doesn't change much the board texture at this point. There is a full rainbow out there, and when the action's on to me, I want to represent aces, kings, queens, so I decide to bet $500, going in excess of 70 or 80% of the size of the pot. My goal here is to get all of his random floats to fold, all of his middle pairs to fold, and when the action's onto him, he snap folds. Awesome, we love it. Aggression pays dividends. Happy to take that hand down, and like I said, we're only getting started. If 8 high wasn't crazy enough, we've got some even more remarkable hands to go over shortly. The action folds over to me here on the button, and we look down at pocket jacks here. Awesome, awesome. We got the pocket jacks, the pocket yannies, the pocket jiggities, whatever the hell you want to call it. We end up here with poker's least favorite pocket pair, it feels like. I end up raising to $60. Only the straddler makes the call. We're going off to a flop that comes ace 7-3 with all spades, monotone board texture. The action checks over to me, and considering I am holding a jack of spades, I actually don't mind just checking this back and allowing myself to get second and third street of value possibly. And not only that, allowing my opponent to bluff, which he's shown quite the propensity to want to at least. The turn card comes as 6 of hearts. He checks over to me once again. At this point, I've got to get some value here. There's still a ton of draws available out there, a lot of random pairs that are worse than mine. So I make it $65. He pretty quickly makes a call, and the river comes a 4 of spades. We now improve to a flush. There is a king of spades and a queen of spades that exist in this deck, in the ether somewhere out there. But when he checks over to me, I'm not too worried about that. I think at this point, it's time to get some value from inferior flushes or non-believing hands, or at least allow him to maybe consider a random overreaction and an overplay and possibly raising. When the action's on me, I decide to bet $175. He goes deep into the tank and looks like he wants to make a big bluff here. I can just feel it. I can feel his energy. I don't know if you guys ever get that, but when you can feel like an opponent's going to do something, if he ends up deciding to raise here, I'm pretty much snap calling. I just have that vibe. He feels super weak, but he ends up making the fold. So looks like our intuition was correct, but unfortunately he was incapable of pulling the trigger. Just like that, we're going to find ourselves in yet another hand where we don't get enough value. And that's all good. Let's see if we can't pull through with this session and find ourselves a nice win. A couple of orbits pass, and in the exact configuration as you guys saw in the last hand, I find myself on the button, this time with 7-8 offsuit. Not a great hand, but I am in position to anyone that's willing to put any more chips in the middle, so I decided to raise to $60. I've been raising the button like 1,000,000% of the time, and this is the weakest holding I've opened with. It seems like the straddle has finally had enough. If he was trying to bluff earlier and didn't find the cojones, he finally found it to do it now, as he decides to make it $250 to go as a 3-bet. Considering I am in position and I've had a pretty solid live tell on him, I think, I end up making the call, even though this hand's pretty bad. We're going off to a flop that comes king 4 deuce, 2 spades, and a diamond. The opponent thinks about it for a minute, and is fumbling with his chips here and decides to bet $250. At this very juncture in the hand, sure, I think 99.9% of people would just muck it. Some percent would just get crazy and raise it here, but I'm thinking some other devious things. I end up making the call with the intention, obviously, on blasting off on pretty much any run out that can help my range. So after making the call, we see a really interesting turn card as it comes the queen of clubs. Again, a hand that I can definitely consider calling with is king queen, and I could only assume it's better for me than him. Sure, he can have pocket queens here, he can have pocket aces, he can have kings. There's a ton of value he can have here, tens, jacks even, but this is another card that I think is just going to help me more than it helps him, and this time he ends up checking it. I think that's my green light. That's all I've been waiting for today, and although I only have 8 high and a dream, we can send our prayer to the poker gods, and hopefully our big bet doesn't get called on the turn. After a brief moment, I end up making it $600 to go. Finally, somebody willing to put some money in the middle with not the best hand in today's session, and that somebody just happens to be me. My opponent goes deep into the tank. He's fumbling with his emotions. He seems to not be happy, and eventually he decides to make the fold. Awesome. I'm super happy with that bluff. It doesn't make any sense, and there's definitely no solvers to tell you to do that, but sometimes, you know, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you guys can agree, you have like a pretty reasonable read on the table and you just kind of go with your gut. And that's what I did here. Moving right along, we've got our last hand of the session. And yet again, we find ourselves in a predicament against our friend Jonah. He decides to open from the hijack to $60. We look down at king 9 offsuit here from the cutoff. Directly to his left, I decided to 3-bet here to $200 when it folds back to him. He pretty quickly decides to make the call, so, you know, I don't know if this is a reasonable rule of thumb, but if you have aces or kings, very unlikely. Queens as well, fairly unlikely. Usually people think about these spots a little bit before making the call, so a little bit of a timing tell, and that's something just to keep in our back pocket, it feels like. Anyways, the flop comes 8, 4, 3, rainbow. The action starts off with Jonah. He continues to play in flow by checking it over to me. I end up making a small c-bet here for $180. Jonah pretty quickly makes the call. We're going off to a turn card that really makes me feel good about myself. And the turn card comes a 9. We now make top pair. When he checks over to me, at first I considered going fairly large here, but in reality, I feel like if I go really large, I end up polarizing my range here. And I think I don't need to be doing that. It'd almost be turning my hand into a bluff. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get value from any 8 here and any random holding that my opponent can have that's inferior, obviously. I end up making it $450. That seems like the perfect amount. He pretty quickly decides to make the call yet again. We're going off to a river that comes to 5. The action checks over to me, And at this point, I find myself in a predicament. Why, you might ask? It's because I feel like if I bet again, it'd be really, really thin, almost too thin. And now the question becomes, okay, if I do bet, what am I trying to accomplish? Sure, I can bet and bet pretty large and possibly get my opponent to fold a better hand like tens or jacks. But in reality, it's almost unlikely that after how I've been playing and the hands I've been showing down, that anybody is going to be willing to make any hero folds against me, especially not a vlog watcher like Jonah. He knows what I'm capable of. So there's kind of that meta warfare going on here. The question now becomes, do I think that I can ever get value from an inferior holding? And I feel like it's just hard to find a ton of worse hands that are willing to call 3 streets. So I end up checking it back to play a little cautiously. He ends up telling me that he has an 8. I tell him quickly that I have a 9. I show my hand, and we're going to rake in a really nice pot to close out today's session. Happy with the way we played today, honestly. Wasn't too bad, and really happy that my bluffs were able to get through, as those were the saving grace for today's session. Sorry for any time that I miss video, by the way, on any of the hands that we post. I promise you, I'd never lie about a hand. I'd never make things up. It's just the honest reality is sometimes the files don't work for whatever reason. When I transfer them, they become corrupt, or I just don't get them at the table because I don't realize that I'm not recording. Anyways, I can't thank you guys enough for the support. You guys are absolutely amazing. I want to throw it back to me in person so you guys can see how I'm feeling after the session. So let's throw it over now.
Pero en la cama nos comíamos y sabemos que eso era más que un hobby. Veces que tiene la táctica, pero yo tenía la técnica. Él solamente te hace llorar. Yo en la cama te ponía a gritar.
And just like that, our session is over. Forgive me, I didn't mean for the session to be slow. Obviously, when I go out, my goal is to get some action. I hope you guys enjoyed that ridiculous 8-high bluff, the float. Nothing in the GTO world or the ranges solver stuff is gonna ever teach you that. I just try to mix it up and play off a feel sometimes. And today that was the case. I had like a live read and I kind of just went with it. Also, I don't know, I think my range was better. I really appreciate the support. It's been unbelievable. If you guys have not heard already, this Sunday, we're gonna be at the Baltimore Casino playing in a wonderful meetup game that I'm super excited to meet a ton of our East Coast friends in. Let's get to the numbers for today. We were into the game for 3,000 and out of the game for just shy of 4,900, 4,870 to be exact. We ended up cashing out with a profit of just shy of 1,900. I'm gonna take that all day of the week. Didn't have to play for too long. Was able to mix it up for y'all. And yeah, hopefully you guys like the crazy bluffs. I don't know, that's gonna end up being like my shtick. It's just, people are gonna have to call me down lighter, I guess. But anyways, that's kind of it for today. Right now we're on the exterior of the bike. I don't like coming to the bike, and I'll explain briefly why I always say that. 1, game selection's just never that great. They don't have that many 5-10 games going. 2, if the 3K max and there's no straddle, it makes the game way too big. And for the most part, nobody even buys that deep, so it's kind of pointless. And lastly, it's mostly the player pool. But I will say, the staff here is unbelievable. Aaron, JJ, who is in charge of production, I believe, and the bike, you guys have known him. And then the dealers here are outstanding. Maybe I'm just used to like not great stuff because of where I've played in the past, but honestly, outstanding stuff from the staff here. And yeah, I don't mean to, I'm not saying I'm gonna play here more often. That's not what I'm saying, but I do like some of those things. Anyways, we have made the trip all the way around the park. The car is parked just shy, just in front of me. I can't thank you guys enough for the support. Hitting over 16,000 subscribers, what the hell? It's kind of crazy to think about that, but you guys are the absolute best. I gotta go to work, sadly, but I appreciate you guys always. Stay happy, stay healthy. More importantly, run good at the tables, y'all. Deuces.